It was supposed to be a beautiful night. The ballroom and across shimmered under the chandeliers, filled with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh roses. Everyone had gathered to celebrate Richard Dube's business success. His daughters, Amelie and Zenzi, stood by his side, one quiet and polite, the other dazzling in a golden dress, smiling for the cameras. But then, something small turned everything upside down. Amelie had simply spoken up, gently disagreeing with her father about a family matter in front of a few guests. It wasn't loud or rude, but Richard's face suddenly changed. His eyes hardened. Before anyone could react, his hand flew across her face. The sound of the slap echoed through the hall. For a second, no one moved. The music stopped. Glasses froze midair. Amelie stood still, her cheek burning, her heart pounding in her ears. And then came the sound that shattered her completely, Zenzi's laugh. Finally, someone shut her up, her sister said, clapping like it was a show. Amelie blinked, stunned. Around her, people whispered. Her mother lowered her eyes, pretending not to see. Richard straightened his suit and muttered coldly, "That's what you get for talking back." The world felt blurry. Amelie could taste salt in her mouth, but she refused to let a single tear fall. She looked at her sister, then at her father, the two people who were supposed to protect her, and felt something inside her break quietly. Without saying a word, she turned around and began walking toward the exit. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as everyone watched in awkward silence. She didn't look back. Under her breath, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise. "This time I won't cry. I'll remember." And for the first time in her life, Amelie meant every word. Zenzi had always been the favorite. Everyone in the Dubé family knew it, even Amelie. From the time they were little girls, Zenzi was the one who got the attention, the praise, the new dresses, and the soft smiles from their parents. She was the golden one, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. When she walked into a room, people turned to look. When she spoke, everyone listened. Amelie, on the other hand, was quiet, the kind of girl who did what needed to be done without making noise about it. While Zenzi went off to study fashion and business abroad, Amelie stayed behind in Accra to help their parents run the family store. Every morning she opened the shutters, arranged the shelves, balanced the accounts, and smiled at customers who didn't even know her name. Sometimes, when business was slow, she'd sketch dresses on the back of old receipts. Her dream designs for a small boutique she hoped to open one day. She could almost see the shop in her mind. Soft lights, African prints, handmade dresses that told stories. But whenever she mentioned it at home, her father would shut her down with the same words. "Dreams don't feed families, Amelie," he'd say, without even looking up from his newspaper. "Be like your sister." Those words cut deeper than any slap ever could. Zenzi loved hearing them. She would flash that smug smile and say things like, "He's right, Amelie. Not everyone's built to shine." Then she'd toss her perfect curls and head out to another event, leaving Amelie behind with her quiet frustration. But what Zenzi didn't know was that Amelie had been watching and listening for years. She had seen the things her father thought no one noticed. The secret meetings, the late-night calls, the business deals that didn't quite add up. She had even overheard Zenzi bragging on the phone once, talking about transferring money and helping Dad clean up. At first, Amelie didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to think her father, the man who lectured her about responsibility, could be hiding something dirty. But then one night, when she was closing up the store, she found a folder he had forgotten in the back office. Inside were documents, bank transfers, offshore accounts, receipts. Her hands shook as she realized what they meant. From that day, she started keeping records, quietly, carefully. She saved copies, recorded snippets of calls, and hid everything inside an old envelope at the back of her drawer. She never planned to use it. She just needed to know she wasn't crazy, that the truth was real. And that night, after the humiliation at the party, when Zenzi's laughter still echoed in her head, Amelie finally opened that. She sat on her bed, the noise of the celebration still faint in the background, and looked at the thick envelope in her hand. For the first time, she didn't feel small or weak. She felt calm, powerful even. She traced her fingers over the edge of the papers and whispered, "You think I'm quiet because I'm weak. But silence is how storms begin." That was the night Amelie stopped being the forgotten daughter and started becoming the one her family would soon fear to underestimate. Amelie sat alone on her bed, the party long over but the echoes still ringing in her ears. The laughter, the whispers, and most of all, the sharp sting of her father's slap. Her cheek had stopped burning, but her heart hadn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see Zenzi clapping, smiling like it was a scene from her favorite show. For hours, Amelie just sat there in silence, staring at the envelope on her desk, the one filled with proof she'd gathered over the past few months. Documents, bank statements, recordings, evidence of her father's dirty deals, all tied to Zenzi's accounts. She'd found everything, piece by piece, never really planning to use it. But tonight changed everything. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts slowly, her thumb trembling slightly until she stopped at one name, Detective McCona. She hesitated for just a second. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. Her family's name, her father's empire, Zensi's spotless image, all of it would crumble. But then she remembered Zensi's voice laughing after the slap, her mother's silence, her father's cold stare. Amelie took a deep breath, lifted the phone to her ear, and said softly, "It's time." Detective McCona's tone was calm but sharp. "You're sure, Amelie?" "I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady. "Everything you need is in that envelope I told you about. It's all real. Every deal, every account." Within minutes, he confirmed what she already suspected. Richard Dube's so-called investment projects were just a cover. The money was being moved illegally, funneled through Zensi's business accounts to avoid detection. Father and daughter had been partners in crime, using Amelie's silence as their shield. That night, it all made sense. The slap wasn't just about talking back. It was about keeping her in line, reminding her who had power and who didn't. They weren't protecting family honor. They were protecting themselves. Amelie's lips curved into a small, sad smile. They thought her silence meant fear. They thought her quiet nature made her easy to control. But they had no idea she'd been building her strength in that silence all along. She looked around her small, neat room, the room they never cared to step into, and whispered, "You wanted me quiet. Now you'll see what silence can do." Outside, the city lights of Accra glimmered like stars. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faintly, a sign that the world was already turning. Amelie lay back on her bed, calm and still. For the first time, she felt no anger, no guilt, no fear. She had made her move without shouting, without revenge posts or chaos. Her silence was her weapon, and tonight, she had finally used it. The morning sun slipped through the wide glass windows of the Dubé mansion, lighting up the spotless floors and expensive furniture. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, like a painting hiding cracks underneath. Amelie walked down the stairs quietly, her face calm, her steps steady. But inside, she felt a strange mix of peace and power. She had made the call. The wheels were already turning. In the living room, her father, Richard, sat at the breakfast table reading the newspaper, pretending that last night hadn't happened. Zensi sat beside him in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone and laughing at something online. They looked so normal, so confident, as if nothing in the world could ever touch them. Amelie entered the room slowly. She didn't say a word at first. She just went to the kitchen, boiled water, and made tea, the sound of the kettle filling the heavy silence between them. When she finally brought the tray to the table, Zensi didn't even look up. "Tea?" Amelie asked softly. Zensi waved her hand without interest. Richard grunted, still reading. Amelie placed the cups down carefully, her movements calm and graceful. Then, without raising her voice, she said, "You both might want to dress nicely today. There'll be visitors." Richard looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" Zensi rolled her eyes, smirking. "Oh, please, Amelie. Not your dramatic moods again." Amelie simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and took a sip of her tea. A few seconds later, the distant sound of engines broke the calm. The laughter stopped. Richard frowned, turning toward the large glass doors leading to the driveway. Through them, he could see a line of black SUVs pulling in, tires crunching over the gravel. Zensi's phone slipped from her hand. "What's that?" she whispered. Before Richard could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. Amelie stood up, her heart steady, and walked over to open it. Detective McCona stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. His expression was serious but respectful. "Mr. Dubé," he said firmly, holding up a document, "you're under investigation for financial misconduct and tax fraud. We have a warrant to search the premises." The color drained from Richard's face. "This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice cracking. "Who would?" But his words faded as he looked at Amelie. She stood there silently, hands clasped, her eyes calm. For the first time, he saw something in her that scared him, strength. Zensi jumped up, panicking. "This can't be happening. Daddy, fix it." But there was nothing to fix. The truth had already stepped into their perfect glass house, and it was shattering everything. As the officers began their search, Richard's trembling hands couldn't hold his newspaper in. The sound of his rage and fear filled the room, the same room where he once humiliated his daughter. Only this time, the echo wasn't from his slap. It was from the sound of his world collapsing, loud, cold, and inescapable. Amelie turned away, walking upstairs as the chaos grew behind her. She didn't need to watch. She already knew how fragile glass looks when it finally breaks. The Dubé mansion, once full of laughter and luxury, now felt like a battlefield. The morning after the investigation, everything had changed. The guards whispered at the gate. The maids avoided eye contact. Even the chandeliers that used to sparkle proudly now hung like silent witnesses to the chaos below. Richard Dubé, the man who once walked with power and pride, was pacing across the living room, his hair messy, his shirt unbuttoned, his voice filled with rage. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, reporters, business partners, even so-called friends. But he didn't answer. The news had already spread across Ghana. Prominent businessman Richard Dubé under investigation for fraud. Zenzi sat on the couch, shaking, her golden robe crumpled. She was calling everyone she knew, her PR agent, her brand sponsors, her social media manager, but no one picked up. Her perfect image, built with smiles and filters, was falling apart in real time. "Daddy, we can fix this," she cried, clutching her phone. "I just need to make a statement, post something, tell them it's all lies." "Lies?" Richard exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "They have evidence, Zenzi. Evidence." He grabbed a glass and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards flying everywhere. "Who would do this to me?" Amelie stood in the doorway, calm and silent, watching them unravel. Her heart didn't race this time. She just felt done. When Richard saw her, his face twisted with fury. "You," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "You ruined us. You ungrateful." Amelie didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye and said quietly, "No. You slapped your ruin into motion." The room went silent. Zenzi froze. Even Richard couldn't speak for a moment. The words hung heavy in the air, sharp and cold. Outside, voices began to rise. Reporters had arrived, cameras flashing through the gates, microphones reaching over the fence. "Mr. Dubé, is it true you're being charged with fraud? Miss Zenzi, are your accounts under investigation? Can we speak to your daughter, Amelie?" Panic spread through the house. Richard pulled the curtains shut. Zenzi ran upstairs, sobbing, yelling, "Don't let them see me like this." But Amelie didn't hide. She took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and stepped outside. The sun hit her face, warm and strong. The reporters turned their cameras toward her immediately. One of them asked, "Miss Dubé, do you have anything to say about what's happening?" Amelie's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I just told the truth," she said. Click, flash. The cameras went wild. Her words spread faster than the scandal itself. Behind her, she could still hear her father shouting and Zenzi crying, their perfect world collapsing like glass under pressure. But Amelie didn't look back. She just stood there in the sunlight, quiet and unshaken, the only one in that house not pretending anymore. For the first time, the silence around her didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. Weeks passed, and the Dubé family name, once a symbol of success, became a headline for disgrace. The newspapers stopped writing praises and started printing scandals. TV anchors discussed Richard Dubé's downfall every night. His company accounts were frozen, his partners disappeared, and his reputation was gone. The proud man who once spoke about legacy now avoided even looking at his reflection. Zenzi's perfect world also collapsed. Her followers on social media dropped by thousands each day. Brands that once begged her to promote their products suddenly stopped calling. Her phone barely rang, and when it did, it was only people asking questions she didn't want to answer. Influencer turned suspect, the tabloids called her. She cried on her stories once, hoping for sympathy, but people weren't kind anymore. The same audience that used to worship her now mocked her downfall. Meanwhile, Amelie quietly packed her bags. She didn't make a big announcement or tell anyone where she was going. She simply filled a small suitcase with clothes, her sketchbook, and her old sewing machine, the one thing that always gave her peace. Then she left the mansion behind. Her new home was a small apartment by the coast. It wasn't fancy. The walls were plain, the bed creaked, and the ocean wind sometimes slipped through the windows. But for Amelie, it was freedom. No shouting, no judgment, no pretending. Just the sound of waves and her own breathing. Days turned into nights filled with quiet reflection. Sometimes she would sit by the window, sewing while watching the ocean shimmer under the moonlight. The rhythm of the sewing needle matched her heartbeat, slow, steady, alive. One afternoon, there was a soft knock on her door. It was her mother. She looked smaller than Amelie remembered, her eyes tired and red from crying. She sat down at the small kitchen table, hands trembling as she spoke. "You could have handled it differently," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't have to destroy everything." Amelie looked at her gently, then said, "Maybe. But after years of silence, I needed to be heard, even if it meant breaking everything." Her mother said nothing more. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked around the tiny apartment, so different from their grand house. But for the first time, she saw peace in her daughter's eyes. That night, after her mother left, Amelie stood on the balcony, feeling the cool breeze brush against her skin. The sound of the ocean was calm, endless, forgiving. She thought about her father's voice, those old words that haunted her. "Be like your sister." A small, sad smile formed on her lips. "I finally am," she whispered to herself. "Except I chose honesty over applause." And as the waves crashed softly below, Amelie realized she hadn't just broken her family's throne. She had built her own, one made of truth, peace, and quiet strength. Amelie's new life began with a single thread. In her small coastal apartment, surrounded by fabric, pins, and a secondhand sewing machine, she started creating again. Not just clothes, but hope. She called her little business Stitched by Truth. The name came to her one night as she thought about everything she'd survived. Lies had broken her family, but truth had finally set her free. At first, she made dresses for local women, teachers, mothers, shopkeepers, each one stitched with love and care. Her designs were bold, full of color and courage. She mixed African prints with modern cuts, making every piece tell a story. When she posted her creations online, she didn't expect much. But soon, comments began to pour in. Who made this? This design feels powerful. Her work has soul. Her small page exploded with attention. People weren't just drawn to her clothes. They were drawn to her story. Someone recognized her name and remembered the scandal that once humiliated her. But instead of mocking her, they admired her strength. She didn't fall, she rebuilt, one comment read. Others called her the woman who turned pain into purpose. Within weeks, local bloggers reached out. Orders started coming in from all over Ghana. Then, one morning, she woke up to a message from the Accra Voice, a popular lifestyle magazine. They wanted to feature her. When the issue came out, the cover headline read, "From Humiliation to Healing, the Woman Who Sewed Her Way to Freedom." Amelie held the magazine in her hands, tears filling her eyes, not of sadness but pride. She had spent years being told she wasn't enough, that her dreams were foolish. And now, here she was living those dreams on her own terms. But not everyone was happy for her. Zenzi saw the article, her face turning red with anger. Her phone buzzed with messages, people congratulating her sister, comparing them, reminding her that fame built on lies never lasts. She thinks she's better than me now? Zenzi muttered bitterly, slamming her phone down. But for Amelie, Zenzi's anger no longer mattered. That storm had passed. Instead of hurting her, it fueled her even more. She wasn't living to prove anyone wrong. She was living to prove herself right. One evening, Amelie stood outside her tiny shop as the sun dipped into the ocean. The golden light danced across the waves and onto her face. She looked up, breathing in the salty air, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, peace. She finally understood that her worth was never tied to her family's approval or society's applause. It was in her strength to rise, to rebuild, and to keep going, even after being slapped down in front of the world. The girl who once walked away in silence had become the woman whose story the whole world wanted to hear. Months later, the Dubé family name, once powerful and respected, became the center of every headline. Businessman under fraud investigation, the news anchors said again and again. The family mansion that once hosted glamorous parties was now surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. But Amelie stayed quiet through it all. She didn't post online. She didn't speak to journalists. She simply waited for the day when truth would finally speak for itself. That day came when the case went to court. Amelie arrived early, dressed simply in a cream blouse and a long navy skirt. Her hair was tied neatly, her face calm, almost too calm for what the day meant. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Lawyers shuffled papers, journalists whispered, and curious faces turned to see the young woman who had dared to expose her own family. When Richard Dubé entered the room, shoulders stiff and eyes cold, the whispers grew louder. For the first time, he looked smaller, not in size but in pride. His confidence had vanished. Zenzi followed behind him, dressed elegantly but with dark circles under her eyes. The social media star who once smiled for every camera now avoided them all. Amelie sat quietly in the back, her hands clasped together. When Richard noticed her, he froze for a second. His eyes flickered toward her, then quickly away. He couldn't face her. Not after everything. The judge began reading the verdict. After reviewing the evidence and financial records, the court confirms charges of fraud and embezzlement against Mr. Richard Dubé. All personal and business assets are hereby seized by the state. The courtroom filled with murmurs. Richard's lawyer tried to argue, but it was over. The empire he built on lies had finally collapsed. Amelie stood slowly. The reporters turned their cameras toward her, expecting tears or celebration. But she didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her voice was steady when she said, "All I ever wanted was respect." The room fell silent. Even the judge paused for a moment. There was something so simple, yet so heavy, in her words. Zenzi, sitting beside her father, turned toward Amelie, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You destroyed the family," she whispered bitterly. Amelie looked at her sister, not with anger, but with calm sadness. "No, Zenzi," she said softly. "You laughed when I was destroyed. I just turned the volume up." For a moment, Zenzi had no words. She looked away, realizing the truth in her sister's voice. As Amelie left the courtroom, cameras flashed and microphones reached for her, but she didn't stop. She stepped outside into the sunlight, breathing deeply. The air felt cleaner than it ever had. Justice hadn't given her joy, it had given her peace. The same silence that once made her feel powerless now felt powerful. She walked away, not as the girl who had been slapped in front of everyone, but as the woman who made the world finally listen. It had been several quiet weeks since the court verdict. Amelie spent her days at her small studio by the coast, surrounded by fabrics, colors, and the soft hum of her sewing machine. Her business, stitched by truth, was growing faster than she ever expected. Every dress she made carried a piece of her story, strength stitched into every seam. One afternoon, as the sun poured golden light through the window, there was a soft knock at the door. Amelie looked up, surprised. When she opened it, Zenzi stood there. Her once perfect hair was tied back, her makeup barely there, and her confident smile was gone. For the first time in years, Zenzi looked real. Amelie didn't say a word. She simply stepped aside, letting her sister in. Zenzi walked in slowly, looking around at the colorful dresses hanging neatly on racks. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said quietly, running her hand across a silk gown. Amelie gave a small smile. "Not hiding," she replied. "Just starting over." There was a long silence between them, the kind that holds years of unspoken words. Finally, Zenzi took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "I was cruel. I thought being the favorite made me special. I didn't see how much I hurt you. I clapped when you fell, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Amelie looked at her sister, the same sister who once laughed as their father humiliated. For a moment, old pain flickered in her chest. But then she saw something different: humility, regret, growth. She sat down on her workbench stool and said softly, "You clapped when I fell, yes, but I'll clap now, because you finally stood up." Zenzi's eyes filled with tears. She walked forward slowly, and Amelie stood to meet her. When they hugged, it wasn't a dramatic movie moment. It was quiet, real, a long, trembling embrace between two women who finally understood each other. Not as sisters who had to agree, but as people who had both been broken and were trying to heal. After a few moments, Amelie pulled back and reached for a folded dress on her table. "I made something for you," she said. Zenzi looked confused. Amelie unfolded it, a stunning gown made of two colors, half black, half gold. The black side was deep and heavy, like sorrow and guilt. The gold side shimmered, glowing like the sunrise. "It's called forgiveness," Amelie said quietly. "Black for the pain we both caused, gold for what comes after." Zenzi took the dress with shaking hands, tears streaming freely now. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Amelie smiled gently. "So are second chances." As Zenzi left, the evening sky turned gold over the ocean. Amelie stood by the window, watching her sister walk away, not with bitterness, but with peace. For the first time, the silence between them didn't hurt. It healed. A year later, Cape Town buzzed with excitement. The Women's Leadership Summit had drawn women from all across Africa: entrepreneurs, artists, dreamers, and survivors. Cameras flashed, voices filled the air, and at the center of it all was one name printed boldly across the banner: Amelie Dubé, the woman who sewed her way to freedom. Backstage, Amelie took a deep breath. Her palms were slightly sweaty, but her heart was calm. She wasn't the same woman who once stood silently while her father and sister mocked her. Today, she was here on her own terms, not as someone's daughter or someone's shadow, but as her own story. When she stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. The lights were bright, the air electric. She smiled warmly, waited for the clapping to quiet down, and then began. "Once," she said softly, "I was slapped in front of 80 guests." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. "I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because silence can be power if you use it wisely." The audience broke into applause, some women nodding with tears in their eyes. Amelie continued, her voice strong and steady. "My story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice, even when the people who should protect you are the ones trying to silence you." In the front row, Zenzi sat quietly, her eyes glistening. When Amelie's gaze met hers, Zenzi smiled, proud, emotional, forgiven. When the speech ended, the entire hall stood up in a standing ovation. Amelie's chest filled with gratitude and strength. As she walked off the stage, sunlight streamed through the glass roof above, bathing her in gold. She whispered to herself with a soft smile, "They laughed when I fell, but I rose, and they had to stand to see me."